everyone, and welcome to Call Your Hits, a Storm Riders Airsoft podcast. Thanks for joining us, everyone. Today, Pat and I are going to be talking about dealing with difficult player situations on the field. We've often talked about how Airsoft brings all kinds of different players together with different expectations, different interests, experiences, and so on. That being said, what we all want from a day of Airsoft will quite often vary from person to person, and in many ways is what makes our sport unique. But at the end of the day, we're all trying to have fun. And because that fun varies from person to person, or that perception of fun can vary from person to person, it can sometimes lead to tension, right? Situations in which people might get upset, frustrated, and in some rare cases also become belligerent. Whether it's someone flipping out because they think another player is cheating, or getting upset because they were shot by what they feel is a hot gun, or even just simply a player behaving in a way that is unsafe or disrespectful to other players. These are all difficult situations, and if you find yourself in the middle of one, it can sometimes be hard to know how to respond properly. Now, before we get too far into it, this topic is obviously not unique to Airsoft. You can quite easily encounter these types of situations in your day-to-day life, at work, at the grocery store, out on the street, basically anywhere. And you might be directly involved in them, or you might simply be a bystander. But no matter where it occurs, how you choose to respond, or indeed if you choose to respond in the first place, can dramatically impact how these types of situations unfold. So, coming back to Airsoft, it's important for us to think about why these situations happen, what are some of the common things we do encounter at the Airsoft games, and what are some good ways to respond when they do pop up. And as a last note, I will add that these situations happen very, very seldom, at least for us. If you believe YouTube, you think Airsoft drama happens on a large scale at every game all the time, and that's just not the case, right? But it does make for entertaining content nonetheless. So let's get into it, Pat. I think first we need to take some time to talk about these kinds of situations, and in general to get a sense of how they come up and what we've encountered in the past.
Yeah, that definitely seems like a solid place to start. I feel like it's worth noting that getting angry yourself regardless is not the correct play usually, although it can be challenging at times. Mm-hmm. But usually when we see a situation where people are getting angry, hostile, really like up in one another's faces, it's most commonly either a matter of, shall we say, like a clash of personality, right? That definitely happens. And I mean, that's a factor in pretty much every avenue of life. Like most things, you will run into people who just like, grind your gears a bit. But other than that, it's really most commonly about the notion of cheating in Airsoft, right? And obviously cheating in Airsoft is a big problem, not as in it is a large problem all the time, but in the sense that when it happens, it is an issue that needs to be dealt with. But largely I feel that that's because this is a sport that's all about playing honorably, right? Because there's no mark left on you other than the odd welt when you get shot. So calling your hits is really, really important. One situation that like it hasn't come up here and it hasn't been an issue, but that the internet has made me aware of, and that I need to be conscious of when I'm playing with my new HPA setup, is that I can adjust that on the fly, essentially. Mm-hmm. And so if I wanted to cheat the FPS, it'd be very, very easy for me to do so. Obviously, I don't want to. I'm running it below our sort of rifleman FPS intentionally because I don't want to be hurting people. But the real issue there is that a lot of the time, the people accusing someone of cheating are really being salty. Or engaging in sort of confirmation bias, right? So there's sort of a like, well, that shot's impossible. Like he just made a shot you can't make with an airsoft gun at this range. And it's like, well, no, you just have to put the time, money, and effort in to make it work that way. Or he's not calling his hits. I've definitely had players not call their hits. But as I've said before, I've also had situations where I'm sure I haven't called a hit, not because I consciously was aware I'd gotten hit and didn't care, but because it hit something hard and I didn't hear it, or, it didn't hit me hard enough to be noticeable.
Yeah, and to be fair, I mean, I think that's happened to everybody at some point or another. You're running, you don't feel the hit, and then you don't call it because you didn't feel it. And if the other person then immediately gets up in your face about it, then that can be problematic. And I think one of the things we need to address is really why do people get salty about this kind of stuff? Well, because they feel it's cheating and so on. But fundamentally, right, you have a situation that has occurred which does not match your expectation of what should have happened. So if you shoot at someone, your expectation is, I hit them, they call it. And if your reaction is, well, I hit them, but they didn't call it, then your expectation is not met. And then consequently, you can very easily become frustrated. And with Airsoft in particular, if it's like not calling your hit or something of that nature, that frustration tends to peak relatively quickly, right? And frustration is not necessarily a bad thing. I think when you think about just your performance in general, like if you get frustrated with something, you can channel that frustration into getting better at that thing, right? You can just redirect that energy into practicing harder, doing more, and that's all fine and dandy. But when it's another person who is, from your perspective, is cheating, then it's quite easy for that to boil over. And once it boils over in anger, that's when you start getting situations which can spiral out of control, right?
And I mean, we're talking about something that we work to get good at, that we enjoy getting good at, right? Like getting kills in Airsoft is part of the positive experience, right? Playing well is enjoyable.
Winning games,
yeah,
right?
Exactly. And so if you're doing everything right to win and you lose, well, that happens, right? But if you're doing everything right to win and you lose because someone else cheated, then that increases your level of frustration. And like we already said, it's okay to be frustrated. It is okay to be pissed off. It's not okay to take it out on people. It's not okay to manage it poorly, right? And really, I mean, I'm inclined towards sort of an ethos of compassion, right? Like, even though that's not how our brains operate sort of in the snap of the moment, right? Usually, if I shoot someone and I'm like, oh, that hit him and he didn't call it, I'm immediately like, arr.
Yeah, agree.
And part of that is adrenaline, really, frankly, like, and the competitive nature and just like, grr. But getting pissed off and getting up in that guy's face is not a thing I do because it's not productive.
Yeah,
right.
Agree.
Firstly, you should give everyone the benefit of the doubt, right? Because maybe I domed that guy, but like maybe he didn't hear it, maybe he didn't feel it. If I shot Phil in the head from 200 feet away, which my rifle can do, it's not going to have a ton of kinetic value. He's not necessarily going to know it hit him. He's not necessarily going to know if it's a ricochet off something else near him that I just hit.
Or did I just bump my helmet? I don't know.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
Yeah.
Was that a branch tapping me on the head? All that good stuff. So I think we should all approach it from that. Yeah. Give them the benefit of the doubt. And yeah. Okay. So your community has, notorious cheater Steve, right? Pulled the name out of hat. Doesn't refer to anyone. That's not an issue for you to deal with by going to this person and yelling at them anyway. Because when in your life have you ever listened to anyone who yelled at you? Like, I'm a teacher, right? I teach kids for a living. You want to know how many kids get yelled at and listen to teachers? 0.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? I do not yell at students because it is ineffective. It will never accomplish the goals I want. And as a rule, from a professional point of view, I refuse to be made angry by anything a 16-year-old does.
I think too, I think too, like there's this other aspect when we talk about your expectations for yourself. Like you mentioned, like, you're coming to the game, you're doing everything right to win and you lose. I think some people do everything right to win, so therefore they expect to win. So when they lose or start losing, then they get frustrated because like, hang on, this is not supposed to happen.
And I think everyone ends up there.
Yeah, but some people come with that baggage, and that expectation is unfounded or unwarranted, right? People coming to the airsoft field because they say, oh, well, I've played paintball for 10 years, so I'm going to be good at this, and so I'm getting hits, and I shouldn't be losing. So then at that point, maybe I start thinking, oh, these hits can't be good, right? And that's why that individual may decide not to call their hits. And I'm just using this as an example. But at the end of the day, this frustration, whether it is justified or not, is coming from the same place, which is you are not getting what you're expecting. And that is making you upset about what's going on. And then you are going to take a variety of different measures, potentially, one of which is getting into people's faces, the other which is, of course, cheating. Or you might do something which is much more reasonable, which is sort of step away from that situation and sort of reassess and go, okay, hang on, is it reasonable for me to be frustrated and upset in this particular juncture?
It's amazing how useful take a deep breath and like step back from it for a second is.
Yeah.
But I mean, like I have definitely had moments at Airsoft where like someone shot me in the ear from 5 feet away at one point. Like I remember that, I promise. And I definitely saw red. Like I was not happy. And I didn't go get up in his face. I stepped back for a second because I was like, no, this is definitely not a productive mindset.
Yeah, that happened to me like a few weeks ago. I think I was talking about, I got shot in the nose and I was like just so upset. And then I went back to the safe zone and I was fine, right? Like once I cooled off, and I'm like, I'm not going to get in that guy's face because, to your point earlier, it's not productive and he is completely in the right. So why would I go and just make an ass of myself, really, by just being a jerk to this guy for no reason, right?
And when you're angry and on, you know, an adrenaline high at the same time, the odds that you're right are way lower than you want to be if you don't take a minute to cool off. But I think you're on the nose there with the managing expectations aspect of it. You know, we practice, you know, we've been playing forever, but like I don't get pissed off when I get shot and taken out of a game because it's Airsoft. That happens all the time, right?
Yeah, exactly.
There's at minimum, you know, in even like a small game, there's often a huge amount of BBs flying around.
Yeah.
I'm a large target, so that doesn't necessarily assist. But yeah, it's like, you know, when you were a kid, it's ridiculous to show up to a water gun fight as a 6-year-old and be like, no, don't shoot me. I don't want to get wet. Yeah. You came to play Airsoft. You're going to get hit. And in a very real sense, you can do everything right and still get hit. Right. Not even necessarily because you were quote unquote outplayed, but just because there are 8 guys on the other team and they're all shooting a whole lot of rounds in your general direction.
Or maybe you do everything right and still get outplayed because they're better than you. Like that's a reality.
Yeah, and there's no shame in
right?
that, you know?
Yeah, no shame.
You know, like the last game I played, I was, you know, trading shots with Matt, and he zeroed it in and smacked me in the face quicker than I zeroed it in on him. Cool.
Them's the breaks. Yeah.
Good job, him. You know, maybe there's something I can take away from that in terms of like practicing for my personal improvement, right? Like there are, you know, personal skills that I can take away from that and work on. Actually, in particular, I'm like, I need to do more offside shooting. But like I went down and high-fived him. That's competition. That's a sport, right? And it doesn't matter what sport you're in. You're not going to win every game. You're not going to win every, you know, sword fight, whatever you do for fun.
And it's not just about sort of the expectation of like winning and losing and stuff. You also have this expectation of like what you are going to do on the field or who you're going to interact with. And we've seen that sort of shitty attitude before where people are like, they behave like they're too good to do certain things. They're too good to play with certain players. And we definitely don't subscribe to that at all. Like we've said before, we love working with new players. We love working with, you know, younger kids, anyone who really is willing to listen and learn. We're happy.
Good for exactly nobody.
Well, exactly. But you will absolutely encounter people who come to the field and they're like, well, I should be squad leader because I've got real world experience, or I've been playing Airsoft for 20 years, or I've got the best gear. My gear is the best, so I should be squad leader. And if they're not, then their expectation is they were going to be squad leader, but they're not. So then they're just going to do their own thing. They're not going to play the team game, all this kind of stuff, which again is just really crappy behavior that's stemming from the fact that their experience is not matching their expectations, and therefore they're taking the steps to remedy that and, actually have that expectation that they're looking for, right?
And if you're the sort of player who's come to the game and gone, you know, like, oh, I don't want to teach new players. All right, fair enough. Like, that's not everyone's bag. Mm-hmm. But don't look down on new players. Like, A, you were a new player once. B, they're how we get new people they're how we keep getting to play Airsoft, right? Like, you know, there's an attrition rate for this sport, right? You know, eventually I will not be able to move well enough to do it. And that's, you know, not a crack at the fact that I'm rounder than I want to be right now. That's a crack at the fact that, like, I'm gonna have arthritis in both my knees. And eventually, like, I mean, hopefully I get to play for another 20 years. I don't know, but I don't think it'll be 30.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, new players are really important to the health of the thing, to the growth of the community. So yeah, sure, you want to go, oh, well, you know, I don't really want to teach these new guys, fine, but don't be a jerk to them.
Yeah.
Right. And to sort of poke at another thing that I was briefly involved in, right? There's a sort of notorious thing in the Society for Creative Anachronism where folks who have expensive kit are not inclined to sort of play honorably and call their hits, and you really need to avoid that. Like, I don't care if you shot me with literally a Walmart gun. Like, if you pulled out a Walmart Springer pistol and shot me, I'm still hit.
Yeah,
right.
Absolutely.
And you get people who go, oh, well, you know, I shouldn't have to take hits from that. Like, it didn't really hurt, or it was cheap, so who cares, right? Like, it's like, no, they're still here. They're still playing. A Walmart Springer is still an Airsoft gun. Deal with it.
Yeah.
And if you're looking at people going, well, like, oh, it didn't hurt, the point of the game is not to get injured, right? And we've talked about that before, but
yeah, like if I have to keep shooting you like multiple times so you feel that that first hit wasn't a fluke or something like that, that's stupid. That's not how the game is played. But I think so far, like, we've been talking about the why, like, why is it that people might behave that way? And I think it's not the only part of this problem, but it is important because it contextualizes some of the behaviors that you'll very likely have seen or will see at some point on the field, right? Before you deal with people, it's important to understand, or at least give some thought to, why it is they might be behaving the way that you're watching them behave. Now, it could just be because they're jerks, right? They just, you know, they just have a very high opinion of themselves and they don't like to talk. But at the end of the day, just being a jerk, that's not really the root cause of that behavior. There's something beneath that. And I'm not saying that you need to psychoanalyze people who are being assholes at your field. That's not at all the direction that I'm going. But rather, we still need to understand what's driving people's behavior so that at least, number one, we understand that we are not necessarily at fault in these situations when people are behaving this way and creating these difficult situations. And number two, it's critically important to recognize that nothing that you can say or do will really control anybody else's behavior. Like, yeah, you can have conversations with them, but at the end of the day, the only person's reaction and behavior that you can control is your own. So when you understand why people are behaving a particular way, then you can choose to take certain steps if you choose to take them, right? As I said at the start, how you respond to something, and indeed if you do respond to something, can have a dramatic impact on how a situation unfolds, right? And it's important to know how to deal with those kinds of people.
And that's a really, perhaps a longer and more eloquent way of saying, this is big boy rules, right? You can't control what other people are going to do, so control your behavior. Right. And yeah, I think forgive yourself when you make mistakes. Like, I've definitely just flipped people off as part of calling myself out of a game because I was pissed off that they shot me in the kidney or whatever. And it's like, oh, ow. And I shouldn't do that. And I've been working to eliminate that. And, like, partly, I think I came to that behavior because when we were a really small community, like, I knew everyone and everyone was my friend. And so, like, you know, if Phil shoots me and I flip him off, he's not going to get mad. He's just like, oh, shut up, Pat. Right.
Yeah.
He might shoot me in the ass again while I'm walking away to punctuate the point, but he's not going to be mad at me. And that's fine if it's just Phil and I playing, or really, like, just our team playing. But I need to be aware of not doing that. And, you know, I'm willing to cop to that. But the takeaway from that is, yeah, don't be a jerk, right, is really the key thing here. Because if you can only control your reactions, right, you can only control your responses. So remember the other guy's a person or girl, whatever. Remember the other player is a person. Remember the other player maybe having a bad day, who knows. And respond accordingly, right? So if there's a cheating issue and it's actually an issue, go talk to a ref. That most fields that you're playing at, if they're paid fields, have a ref, and that is their function.
Yeah,
They're there to
absolutely.
specifically deal with the issue you are having. If the ref, or rather, if you're playing on a field that isn't refereed, and you don't have some sort of way of enforcing that, you're probably doing it wrong, right? In the sense that if you're playing on a field that doesn't have a ref, it's probably a relatively small community, and you can probably just group everyone up and go, hey, not calling anyone out here, but like, remember to call your hits, right? And that's a lot more reasonable than either, walking across the field to scream at Steve at either a place where you're paying to play and there are refs or not.
Yeah.
Because, again, how many times in your life have you ever actually listened to and heard what someone who was yelling at you was saying and thought about it?
Yeah. You really need to give some thought to when you're frustrated. Like, why is it that you're frustrated, number one? And then if the action that you're going to take as a consequence of that is going to escalate the situation, perhaps that is something you need to reconsider. So like Pat was saying, we have access in most cases to like field refs or marshals or whomever who you can speak to and say, like, this is the issue that we've been having. Could we please address it? So that we don't have to escalate the situation. However, there will be times when you are in a situation where someone else has already escalated the situation, right? Someone else is already engaged in a shouting match, is already being belligerent, is already engaging in behavior that is detrimental to everybody's fun. So what do you do?
And I mean, sometimes it'll be you that they're flipping out at, right? It'll be you that's getting told off. And other times it will be someone else, right? And so if it's you, genuinely, like, walking away seems to me to be the best outcome. Because it is simultaneously the safest outcome, right? Like, I'm not super afraid of getting punched in the face, but like, I don't want it to happen. And you shouldn't want it to happen, right? Like, our audience should probably be nodding to that, right? Like, if you're like, oh no, I love getting punched in the face, get that checked out.
You probably have a concussion.
Yeah, right. But sorry. I found that very funny, evidently.
I'm hilarious.
Yeah, that's true. But aside from that, you want everyone to be safe, and that includes you. Now, that being said, if someone is lighting into another player on the field, then maybe you're in the position to play peacemaker, right? Maybe you can just be like, hey guys, we need to step off and like take a break from this for a minute. And I feel like it's often more effective to say, hey, why don't we all walk away, than it is to say, hey, you need to calm down. Because again, how many times in your life have you been told to calm down and actually calm down? And if you're the kind of person who can sort of relieve tension with humor and you think that'll work, sure. There are a bunch of ways to get people to de-escalate.
Yeah. And if you're in a position where you're being made uncomfortable by things that you are seeing on the field or hearing on the field, but you also simultaneously do not want to get involved, either because you are afraid for your own safety, or because you just really don't want to. There's no shame in that either. Like, people think, oh, you have to be brave and you have to intercede and, interpose. That's not necessarily the case. Not everybody is going to do that. And that's totally okay. And more to the point, that's why there are refs and marshals. So if some guy on the field, or if one player is on the field is letting into another player, you should let the marshals know about that. Let the ref know about that so that they can intercede and resolve that situation. That's not something you should have to deal with unless you feel comfortable doing so and de-escalating the situation, which is to say, make the situation better, not worse.
Yeah. And right? I mean, I'm a big guy. So like if people, God help us, I hope this never happens. It never has while I've been playing. But if people start throwing hands at Airsoft, like, yeah, I'll step in and separate them. No problem. Right. Or at least I'll be one of the people to step in and do that. But I'm not there to resolve disputes at, the pay to play fields we play at. That's the ref's job. So if there's a dispute going on, I'm going to let the ref deal with it. If there's no ref around, then I'll try to de-escalate it and make sure it doesn't become a thing. But yeah, I'm willing to put myself out there like that, but not everyone is. And that's completely fine, right? It's not cowardice or any daft thing like that. It's just, your level of comfort determines your actions. And that's completely fine. And if anyone tells you otherwise, they're an idiot.
The other thing I would say too is, like, there's lots of situations that are not as escalated as that. So for example,
Absolutely.
coming back to what we mentioned, like situations where people are just being difficult to deal with, right? Because they won't go along with the plan, or they're complaining all the time. They're just not being helpful. All these kinds of situations, which again, I'm sure many of you have experienced. And how you deal with those is also going to be very similar, in the sense that when people are in those situations, the best thing you can do is to step back from that situation, to let the person sort of say what they have to say. Because what will generally end up happening is most people will listen to that person and realize that they're not being reasonable, and ultimately sort of just go, you know what, that's just Steve being a crybaby. That's just Steve being a bad sport or whatever. And everyone else will sort of turn their backs to that and sort of focus on the positive aspects. And when that person who is, being the bad sport, being the crybaby or whatever, finds that nobody is listening to them anymore, they will make the own decision for themselves to either, as we say, self-select and go home, or to just shut up and go along with the plan, right? Because nobody likes to be on the outside.
Yeah, I think Phil's absolutely right. Anyone who's, especially if it's a recurring thing, anyone who's screaming at their opponents or teammates in a game of Airsoft is likely to sort themselves out of the community for you. And if they want to keep playing, they're going to come around to, I hesitate to say normal behavior because we're playing Airsoft, but, the conventional behavior of an Airsoft player at any rate. Mm-hmm. Right. And that's desirable, right? That's a normal process. And you don't need to get involved. Even though I've said that there are situations where, I'll step in just to try to de-escalate things. Yeah. I think it's really important to be conscious of whether or not this is your problem or your business, whether or not you need to stick your nose into stuff, right?
Absolutely.
Because we've talked before about both Phil and I getting pissed off at Airsoft and walking it off, right? And both of us are quite capable at this point of going, hey man, do you need to talk about this, or do I need to just let you grr for a minute, right? Would you like space to growl in? And both of those things are fine. Right. The thing that's not fine would be either of us taking it out on, other folks at Airsoft. And not that either of us is particularly inclined to it, but if I tell Phil to F off in the middle of a game, he's not going to take it personally. But we're also adults. If I offend him, if I actually make him upset, he will address it with me, and vice versa. Mm-hmm. That's not an expectation you can have for every random Airsofter you play with.
Totally.
And so if someone is steamed, it's probably cool to go, hey man, you good? I don't think anyone's likely to get up in your face about that. But, unless you know the person, maybe don't crack jokes about it. Just let them calm down, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Dealing with these kinds of situations, any type of situation, whether it's, like we were saying, like cheating, or whether it's just a situation where someone's being difficult, it requires calm. It requires a little bit of standoff. And most importantly, ultimately, the situations just need to be de-escalated. And the best way to do that is just time and distance, right? And physically moving away from that place can sometimes be helpful. But when I say distance, you just need to take a little bit of time to cool off, like Pat has said. And when enough time has passed, depending on your relationship with this individual, especially if, the people who we play Airsoft with, in a lot of cases, are not going to be people like myself and Pat, in that we've been friends for as long as we've been alive, essentially. It'll be friends that you've made. A lot of the Storm Riders are people who I only know through Airsoft. So I don't necessarily know every aspect of their personality. And if they were to do something like lose their cool at somebody else, I would have a relationship that's strong enough to them to go, once things have calmed down, to say, hey man, did you know that when you did this at the game, that made me feel pretty awkward because, right? I don't think that was a very good look. We're trying to build a strong community, and it seems like you were really pushing people away, right? And have a conversation about that. Talk about what it is that you observed and listen to what they have to say about it and have a conversation. But that's only something you can really do with someone who you have a relationship with, right? If you go to a random person who is losing their mind at someone and say to them, hey man, you're making an idiot out of yourself right now, that's probably not going to go the way you think it will.
You have just joined the people they're going to be yelling at, right?
Totally.
And for no benefit to you and for no benefit to them or the person they were yelling at in the first place, right? Because
Yeah.
Someone's still yelling. And yeah, that's a really solid point, right? There's no benefit to inserting yourself if you're going to escalate the conflict, right? It doesn't work out well. And likewise, if you are going to talk to someone, often it's a good idea to let them have that space first, right? Because like, sure, if I'm being a jerk and Phil says, hey, Pat, you're being a jerk, like, give it up. I will. I'm not going to be less angry because of that. I'm going to be more angry. But like, you know, at least I have the good sense to be ashamed of my behavior if someone is if Phil is telling me that. And because of that, because of our relationship, I'll do the right thing there. But if some random person is like, hey, Pat, you're being a dick, I'm not going to go, oh yeah, necessarily. I mean, I hope that I will listen because that's a good idea.
Yeah.
But angry Pat does get angry and is not always a sensible human being, just like everyone else.
So one of the things that we would like you to consider is how do you actually broach some of these topics with people if you are the aggrieved party, right? In particular, when it comes to hits, how is it that you can have a conversation with someone who you think you just hit without really pointing the finger at them? And what we would recommend is, like Pat just mentioned, to give them the space by asking them the question. There is nothing accusatory about saying something like, I think I actually might have hit you back there. What do you think? Right? Because then that gives them the option to go, oh no, you didn't because it just hit off the cover in front of me. Fine. Well, then you give them the benefit of the doubt that that's what happened.
Yep. And it is really important to phrase it that way, to be like, hey, did I hit you? Like, I'm not sure. Because if you're asking a question, it gives them a chance to, even if you did hit them, to go, oh no, man, you missed me. Sorry. Like, whatever. And then at least they're aware, oh shit, you know, like I did a bad thing, and we'll address it, right? Even if they're not being completely straight with you. And that's a normal human response, right? Hey, look, I'm ashamed. Okay, I'm not, oh, maybe I won't put my foot in. Or maybe they're, you know, a little more upfront and they'll be like, oh yeah, you hit me or you didn't. But asking them about it rather than going, you're a dirty cheater and you didn't call your hit, changes the tone of it. It makes it a, you know, hey, we're both here, what's going on, rather than a, you suck, I hate you kind of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And to be honest, I've had that happen to me where Matt shot me in the village one time and we went back to the safe zone. He's like, I actually think I hit you while you were running. And I was like, oh my God, I'm so sorry. Like, I definitely didn't feel it, but it's entirely possible. What else can you really expect? If you go up to someone and you tell them, hey, you're a dirty cheater, what exactly do you expect is going to occur as a result of you saying that? Number one, they're very unlikely to go, yeah, you're right, I am. Right? Like, I don't think there's any scenario where people answer that. Chances are it's immediately going to escalate, right? In a situation where you say, hey, I'm not sure if I hit you, or I think I might have hit you, what do you think? They can just go, no, man, you definitely didn't. And you go, okay.
Yeah.
And that's it, right?
And that leaves you both not feeling, you know, mad and upset and confrontational. And like, even if you're like, oh, I'm pretty sure I hit that guy, and you're kind of grr about it, if you're reasonable about asking it, you've done everything you can. Let it go.
Yeah. It comes back to, you can only control what happens with yourself, right? So maybe you did hit that guy, maybe you didn't. The only thing you can control is what you do from that point forward. And if that's having a conversation with them and not with the marshals or whomever, then you need to approach it in a way that is a conversation and not just a shouting match, right?
Yeah. So that means both phrasing it as a question, as a way of not escalating things, but also listening, right? And this kind of ties into the taking space thing, right? There's no point in immediately getting involved in that conversation, because even if you're trying to be, you know, polite and reasonable, if you're still like actually, you know, steamed off about it, if you're still running the adrenaline high, you're not going to handle it right.
Yeah. Yeah. The last part that I want to touch on, which we've talked a lot about, like, you know, people and like escalations and stuff, but there's also this point, and I mentioned it a little bit earlier, where frustration hasn't boiled over yet. So you're frustrated about something and you haven't decided to like go full send into yelling at somebody's face.
The hypothetical pot is bubbling, but not boiling over yet.
Yeah. Right. And so there's a moment where you have an opportunity to understand what exactly is frustrating and how you can deal with that. And again, thinking about it for yourself is one piece, but one piece that I really want to convey to our listeners, especially when it relates to newer players, when you see frustration going on the field, especially as it relates to gameplay, as it relates to people using their gear and stuff, there absolutely is a space for you to intercede, to say to someone, hey, I noticed you got a little frustrated with your gun. I noticed you got a little frustrated when we were playing that last game or whatever. What's up? Right? And listening to what they're frustrated about, and if it is appropriate, providing a little bit of advice, a little bit of guidance. And I say a little bit because one thing I've seen very commonly on the airsoft field is people are struggling with their rental gun, or maybe it's an intro gun, it's like a G&G Raider or whatever. And people will say, oh yeah, just get a Specna arms and you won't have to deal with that problem. Oh, just get a Crytac, you won't have to deal with that problem. And
how is that helpful?
yeah, it doesn't help that person in that particular instance. Are there other things that you might suggest that could help that person do a little bit better? It's like, I can't hit anything with my gun. Hey, so maybe next time we're playing together, maybe you and I can push up a little bit further up. Maybe that'll help you get some couple more hits. What do you think?
I mean, it can also be as simple as going, do you know how to set a hop-up unit?
Totally.
Are you sure your gun's feeding? Do you know how to wind the high cap mag on your rental, right? Or on your brand new airsoft gun? Because new players, yes, okay, there are lots of people who know a ton and are getting into it because they've done a lot of research or watched just a thousand videos on YouTube. But there are just as many who heard about airsoft from their friend, thought it was cool, and showed up for their first game and didn't know how to take the mag out of a gun. Hi, my name is Pat, and that was my first airsoft game.
Yeah, for sure. And also, I mean, when you're playing on the field, you can see or hear people get frustrated, and you can say, hey, man, like, what are you getting frustrated about right now? It's like, oh, I just can't hit that guy. He's not calling his hits. You could say, okay, well, what's our plan? Like, what do we want to do about that? Maybe he's not. Maybe you're not hitting him. Right? You have an opportunity to intercede before the frustration boils over. And that's a much, much better space to be in when you're trying to help someone get through frustration rather than de-escalate a situation that has already boiled over, right? It's a lot easier to keep the toothpaste in the tube than it is to try and put it back in.
100%. It's not effective to deal with these things after they blow up if you can deal with them before. Right. And in a wide range of ways. I notoriously showed up for airsoft for many years, grumpy in the morning because I got out of bed and didn't have coffee because I didn't know I should drink coffee. But, you know, my teammates teasing me about being grumpy was a great way to get me out of my head. Right. And back to a positive space for that. Likewise, if I'm having a game where my gun's not performing well, we've got like 7, swap it out, keep going. Right? If Phil's having a game where his gun's not performing well, swap it out, keep going. Find ways around the issue. If it's a new player and they're like, oh man, I can't hit that guy, I can't reach that guy, whatever, right? You know, I mean, if I'm there and he's outside of the range of your brand new gun or your rental, I mean, he might not be outside mine, so maybe I can help in that way. Mm-hmm. But more to the point, maybe we can push up, flank him, do something about it in a tactical sense, because maybe it's not that he's not calling his hits, you're just not hitting him. And especially as we've talked about before, people often are really bad at estimating distance in airsoft. And often, you know, we're like, oh, my gun can shoot 300 feet. And you're like, that is actually 75 feet.
Yeah.
And so I've definitely had people look at me and go, oh man, like I'm hitting Pat. And I'm like, that BB is hitting 15 feet in front of me. And I'm sure it's happened. I'm sure it will happen again. I think it's happened to lots and lots of airsofters where someone's firing you and just not reaching.
Yeah.
That is a thing to tell new players about. That is a situation where you can be like, oh, maybe your gun's just not reaching him. Let's push up. Let's flank him. Let's do something else. Or really, it can be a situation where you're standing there and you watch them shoot a guy and the guy gets hit in the bean, you know, and goes, eh. And you're like, well, nope, that's actually a problem. Let's go talk to a ref about it before you get angrier.
Yeah, absolutely. And when it comes to, I intimated this at the start, and when it comes to dealing with difficult situations and sort of de-escalating situations, this is not a skill that is unique to airsoft, right? We could go on and on about the psychology of having conversations, difficult conversations with people about even stuff as simple as like nonverbal communication and body language and how that impacts how people respond in situations. Stuff as simple as putting your hands on your hips when someone is talking to you, making yourself more combative than you might be, right? As a perception. And now the other person thinks you're being a jerk because your hands on your hips and you're not listening and all this kind of stuff. We could go on and on about this kind of stuff, but fundamentally speaking, what we really want people to take away from this conversation is if you're having difficult situations on the field, number one, you need to listen. You need to understand why these conversations are actually happening, why these situations are actually happening. And when you understand the situation, then you can choose how you want to best intervene. And if it's the case of people who are breaking the rules, if it's people who are abusing the rules, or especially if it's other people who are other players who are putting other people at risk in some way, like if they're cheating about their velocity limits, for example, you absolutely need to involve the people who are stakeholders of the field, whether it's the field owner, whether it's the refs, the marshals, whomever. And if you're not playing at a commercial field, you're playing on a private game, then in some cases you will need to be that person, or you collectively as a community will need to get together. And that's something that, in our history, we have seen with players who, as a community, before we played, this is a long time ago, before we had the frontline field, where there were certain players who we did not like to play with because we felt they were unsafe. Those people, as a community, we talked to them and they self-selected and we never saw them again, right? And those are the kinds of decisions that you're going to have to make, especially when it comes to safety. But for all the other stuff, whether it's the frustrations that you're experiencing on the field, a lot of conversation with people can really go a long way to keeping people happy and positive and engaged and being part of the team.
And as tempting as it might be, don't geek them, right? Figuratively or literally, really, right? Don't discard a player because they're having a bad day or because they're grumpy or, frankly, even because they're not calling their hits on any given one random day, right? You don't know what is going on in their lives. You are probably never going to know what's going on in their lives, but often letting it ride is the right play. And if it's a recurring problem, then get the refs to deal with it, right? Get the field owner to deal with it. Or if, you're running a community field and it's not really a pay-to-play kind of place with refs, then maybe talk to other players and form a consensus. And then address the issue with the person, but address the issue with the person not when everyone's there and pissed off, but after you've all calmed down.
Yeah, absolutely. So as the saying goes, guys, cooler heads always prevail. So if you're in situations where things are getting heated, take a little bit of a time to move away from that situation, let stuff cool down, let the temperature come down a bit before you address stuff in a more mature and more ultimately helpful way that helps the community progress in the direction you want to.
Don't become the next guy on YouTube that, has a video like, random airsofter screams at people.
Yeah. Like the airsoft drama that you see on YouTube, it's highlight reel stuff and it's not really for me. I don't really enjoy it. And quite frankly, I don't think it's a good look for our community in general, right? For airsofters in general. That's not representative of what airsoft is actually like. And a lot of these situations are caused by just escalations and escalations. And you really want to be on the other side of that. You want to be the cooler head. You want to be the person who is the voice of reason, because ultimately for all the people who are bystanders, they're much more likely to rally around the person who is not making an ass of themselves and shouting and screaming than they are the guy who is being a jerk, who's full of themselves and stuff like that. Those aren't the kind of people that the community will rally behind. So it's much better for you to be on that other side. So hopefully you've taken a little bit of context out of this conversation. You're able to apply it in the situations if they do occur on your fields. That's really all we have for you this week. We hope you enjoyed the content. As always, we plug the Discord. If you get a chance, join us on Discord. We have a really great community. We're including more members of the community into our podcasts over the coming weeks and months. So if you have ideas that you'd like to talk to us about, that's something we're absolutely open to. So make sure you join the Discord and engage in the conversations. And until that time, that's all we got for you, and we'll see you next week.
Think, breathe, stay calm, and have a good week.
Take care, everyone.